So we've got lots of questions, obviously, to do with Mercedes and Russell this weekend. No surprise there. Thanks so much for all of them. Let's start with a question from @yaboyouija, who asks, do you guys think Mercedes will give Russell another chance in the W11 after this week's colossal F-up, as Toto Wolff put it, rather gracefully on live TV?
Came as a bit of a shock, didn't it?
Yeah, usually it shows how annoyed he was. He didn't care. He was like, that's the way that it was, and for a team that is so dedicated to its perfectionism, it's understandable that they'll be frustrated with that. Now, as it currently stands, at time of recording, we don't know whether Hamilton's going to be actually at Abu Dhabi, and it doesn't seem, I don't know, I'm not sure how it looks, actually. Some people say it doesn't seem likely.
Yeah, it's a hard one because Hamilton's stayed silent on social media for the last 5 days, which is really unusual for Hamilton on all accounts. He's usually quite verbal in the most positive ways. Not always in the past, but he's always been on social media. We haven't had an official update from the team. Apparently, he was obviously symptomatic with COVID-19 symptoms. I think Toto said he's taken a step in the right direction, and that's literally the only news we've got. Obviously, to leave the country, he's got there's various tests. He's got to test positive 4 times in a row to enter the paddock or participate in a race, and there's different quarantine phases and periods for different countries. So it's a bit of a nightmare for the team, to be honest. It really depends on how Hamilton's feeling. And that's the only answer. I don't think it's a decision Mercedes will make. I think it's is Hamilton fit to race? Yes. Then Hamilton will race in the Mercedes. If Hamilton's not fit to race, then George will get that second chance next week.
Yeah,
or this
surely
week,
it'll be Russell.
I'm thinking it's heading towards that direction, but they didn't announce Russell until Thursday last week, so I can't imagine there'll be much confirmation until. I don't expect anything until Wednesday at the earliest, because before then, Hamilton could test negative 4 times and participate. So they've got to hold out until, the tests are done. But thank you very much for your question. Moving on, we've got another question about George. Does George get disqualified like he technically should have for the mixed tyre set that he didn't get a puncture and wins the race? Nathan Reed thinks that the stewards did bend the rules a little bit because he was so far down the grid. So what's your thoughts on that, Alex? Should have George got disqualified given the mix-up in tyre compounds? Well, not the tyre compounds, sorry. It was the tyre sets, wasn't it?
Yeah, so what happened, and we'll go over this in detail in the race discussion, is that he got Bottas's tyres on the front instead of his own set. And I believe they're part of the Parc Fermé rules because obviously they may have different tyre pressures, for example. So it's never happened before in Formula One. That rule has never been breached before in Formula One in regards to putting on the wrong person's tyres and then going out. That's what was in the stewards' report. They did recommend that the FIA change the rules because the 3-lap grace period that applies for putting on the mixed compounds does not apply to this rule.
Oh, I see.
So I think what happened is they realised that it was an unusual set of circumstances that had never happened before. Mercedes pitted immediately in order to rectify it, and that was the penalty, essentially. They were penalised by having to pit again. They had to do it. They knew they had to do it.
Yeah.
And they were also fined €20,000, which is a pretty pathetic amount considering some of the largest manufacturers in the world.
That's loose change.
I do wish they'd find them a reasonable amount. Like, what's €20,000 to a team that can spend 300, 400 million on a championship charge?
They probably spend that on a weekly budget on catering. Like,
yeah.
They've had 2 people they have to feed and the amount of personnel. That's probably a week's budget for catering. Interesting rule. I'm sure it'll get picked up on Sky Sports or, on over Twitter, and the FIA or Formula One will do a piece on it and how it's potentially will change in the future.
Yeah, I think they will. I think they will change it because it does make sense for them to equalise those. They are very similar circumstances. If Russell had gone on to win the race and not got his puncture, I think that it probably would have played out much the same. They probably would have maybe given them a bigger fine. I don't think they would have punished him because, like I say, the punishment was that he had to pit again. That was the penalty. It was effectively a 20-second time penalty.
Yeah, of course. which was,
and it's not like it was potentially dangerous.
Yeah. And 20-second time penalty or pissing at a track which is only 55 seconds long is a colossal loss. Whereas if you potentially had that same situation at Spa, you're only missing out on a third of the lap time, or not even that, it's a quarter of the lap time. So yeah, the damage was done, and I guess Mercedes was proactive and obviously tried to fix it as soon as possible, which is why the fine was the penalty and nothing else.
Moving on then, next one from @TheRealDS6 asks, why did they pick Russell over Van Dorn really? Which suggests that there's some kind of secret reason why they might have done it. I don't know if there is necessarily. I mean, Van Dorn is a great driver, but Russell is, he's the future of the team, it seems, when either Hamilton or Bottas eventually, or Hamilton decides to sort of move on, or Bottas decides to move on or is forced to move on. So Russell seems like the obvious pick because, he's most likely to be in the car in the future. So it makes more sense to put him in over Van Dorn.
Yeah, there's nothing really else to add to that apart from, Russell has driven a Formula One car this year on every single race. So he's got some sort of experience. There's the experience there, whereas Van Dorn hasn't stepped foot in a Formula One car this year. I can't remember the last time he has done. So the obvious choice would be Russell, especially he is the future of the team. Moving on to the next one. This is a very interesting one, which has been a topic of discussion throughout my household as well. Has this hurt or helped Hamilton's contract negotiations with Mercedes? As initially, Russell was leading and is cheaper than Hamilton, but since the failure of the pit stops and strategy, would Hamilton have more or less leverage to negotiate his terms? Now, I'm going to start with this. I think it's a very, very interesting question. I'm glad you sent it in. I think if Hamilton hadn't got COVID, they'll be talking about their contract now. He's wrapped up the World Championship. They wrapped up the Constructors' Championship as well. So they were going to start negotiations. And given Hamilton's prestige, reputation in this sport, he's got all the balls in his court. He can name a figure and he almost guarantee or within reason that Mercedes will turn around and say, you know what, you've done so much for us. You are a fantastic driver. You've secured 6 championships with Mercedes. We'll pay it. And I'm not taking anything away from Hamilton here because, I'm a massive fan and, I'm British, support all British drivers like George Russell. George Russell stepped in that car now after 2 days of practice and a qualifying session. He led the majority of that race. And I know it's got a lot to do with the car. And obviously he is in one of the fastest cars on the grid. But he was faster than Bottas. He got him off the line. And we'll talk about how the ins and outs of Bottas and Russell throughout this whole race. But I do think it takes a little bit of negotiation away from Lewis, given that if everything went to plan today with the pit stops and the puncture, which was an unusual occurrence for Mercedes, it was completely out of what they normally have on a race weekend. Russell would have been up in the podium positions, for sure, first, second, or third. There's no doubt about it. That's what I feel like. So Mercedes would have ideally scored a 1-2 without a 7-time world champion. So do they need to shed that amount of money when they can secure almost the same result with much cheaper drivers? And I'm not taking anything away from Hamilton. And, Hamilton may have not got a puncture. He might have drove differently. He may have, spotted issues or identified issues quicker. He's got so much experience. He may have been able to prevent anything which happened today. But it's a very interesting conversation, and I'm interested to hear what you think, Alex.
I don't think it will affect negotiations much, if at all. One race does not make a season. Russell was brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was brilliant, but that's not really the same as doing it over a whole season.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that.
And Hamilton is not just a racing driver. He's an icon. He is an international star. He brings a level of commercial gravity to the Mercedes brand that nobody else on the grid and very few people in the entire world of professional sport can bring. So I think Hamilton is worth every penny to them. And what Russell did today, as incredible as it was, Hamilton does week after week after year after year, and he has done every single season pretty much.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But could Russell do that?
I can't imagine it making much of a difference overall. But it's a very interesting point because, sure, it's going to be in the back of Mercedes' mind, but George Russell isn't a new prospect to him. He's been with them a long time. So it's something that they've probably thought about before. Russell will definitely be a lot cheaper to begin with. He might go up in value quite considerably over time.
Yeah, sure.
But as to affecting the contract negotiations, probably not. I'd be very surprised. I think they kind of already know what situation things are. And as great as that race is, I don't know how much impact it will have on that situation.
Well, there you go. You asked a question and you've got two different answers from both Alex and I, and sometimes that just happens on the podcast. But
that question was from Shiv Bagnari, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much for sending that in.
But thanks for your question.